Thank you, Otto. Good evening and welcome back to the program. The Dewan Rakyat was recently told that 7.81 billion ringgit in cash withdrawals were made by EPF members from their account 3, which is the flexible account, as of 24th of June. Now, this was following a total transfer of 11.52 billion ringgit from account 2, which is the Sejahtera account, made by 27.8% of members under the age of 55 who had decided to make that initial transfer permitted by EPF since the account restructuring on the 11th of May. Now, with us to discuss this further, we have distinguished Professor Datuk Dr. Raja Rasia of the Asia-Europe Institute at University Malaya. Prof, thank you so much for being with us today.
You're welcome.
Prof, my first question today has to do with this transfer. Now, EPF members have till 31st of August to make a one-time transfer of 1/3 of their savings from account 2 to 3. And now in just slightly over a month, we are already seeing withdrawals of over 7 billion ringgit. I presume that this figure will get bigger as we get closer to the deadline. Should we be alarmed?
It's a good question, but let's not forget that the attempt to restructure the EPF funds to increase from the earlier program of having 70%. Upon retirement, you are able to withdraw the money, and 30% was devoted to funds that to do with those seeking to buy a house, a car, and so on. Now, the idea of bringing on the flexible account, and now we are only restructuring the second account rather than the first one. In fact, we are actually passing on 5% from that second account.
That's right.
And then creating this flexible account 15%.
Yeah.
Now, what actually that means is that principally, me looking at the data set, the person retiring still has got 75% for post-retirement use of the money, which we think because we no longer expect the person, although many go to work still, to have an income stream. Now, I think the concern that we have over the last month that they have withdrawn 7.81 billion, unless we have really an assessment of those who are withdrawing it, whether they are from the B40, it's still difficult to expect them because you have a deadline of August 31st to make that sort of withdrawal. My own impressions are that because the intention of providing that followed from government's own interviews with people. And they were actually, in fact, the first attempt to do that was during COVID. The previous government was doing it then. And what looked like a bad, an example for the people, seemingly was what was chosen by the people. Instead of, say, a poor person going to an along or without a collateral seeking a much higher payment, you're just seeking your own fund. This is a decision made by the contributor.
Correct.
And it's only the 15% we are dealing with, not now an increased 75%.
Yeah.
We have to ask this question. Should we leave an individual who's no longer, you cannot call as a baby who can't think, making the decision? Unless you have much more profound information to say that they are misusing that fund or abusing it in some way.
Yeah.
I think it's too early, even though it's 7.181 billion. And how many households does it involve? So I, as an academic, I'm making that point from that perspective, trying to be neutral in relation to the respondent, to the employee who's withdrawing that money. And this is money that is actually from an account meant for borrowing to buy houses, to buy cars, and rather than at retirement age.
Right.
So I wouldn't be terribly concerned. I must say that I wouldn't be unless you have that sort of data to make sure that these people are abusing it because they're just simply being really not careful at all in the way they spend the money.
Yeah.
And yet you are still seeing the 75%
still there,
kept there,
safe
for them at retirement.
That's right.
So even though the whole logic of savings from the Modigliani-Miller theory, the origin of it, is that for a common man rather than the poorest or the richest, because it doesn't apply to them, that saving is there really because when you start, you haven't got the money, you will be studying with loans, you will have house to pay and so on, you start that way. And then you contribute towards this fund, which not only pays for all that in some ways, but in the end provides you the savings.
Yeah.
Now, extrapolating from that, I'm not terribly concerned, though. That's what I would say.
Now, Prof, speaking about that, it does seem, though, that working adults, especially under 55, seem to be in dire need of cash or liquidity. Is there a possibility of two things here? One is the low to medium salary, and second, the rising cost of living. What do you think about that?
These are all pertinent points to look at, but are we going to narrow it down to the EPF? The EPF withdrawal gives you an indication, a very powerful indication, presumably, rather than jumping to conclusions, that people are borrowing because of emergencies.
Right.
Either kecemasan or darurat. They are looking at that as a point. Instead of accessing much higher rates of interest in the black market, and of course without the collateral, they are unlikely, even though the OPR is still 3%. It's still a cost to bear. Now, I am one who feels we need to really look at the statistics behind the household, whether they are really borrowing for emergencies.
Right.
If we are dealing with emergencies, then we need to have to check our own system of providing allowances. The point that you're raising, 7.81 billion, is a powerful point to raise concerns that would require us to do the research. The statistics definitely, because not only that they have a system of identifying how funds are used, the PADU systems clearly will show what the Stats Department is doing through e-invoicing. That would clearly show who are those withdrawing and for what they are withdrawing, including the transactions they make.
And that is important information, isn't it?
Absolutely.
To go into the micro
details. And it's not
details.
that you can't get it.
Yeah, you can.
It's available.
Especially after this.
Absolutely, yes.
Right. Now, Prof, will this account 3 withdrawal help boost domestic consumption?
Now, we'll have to see whether, because I remember looking at social media before coming here, it gives the impression that people are simply withdrawing, buying all these luxurious goods and so on. I think unless we have the data to prove it, it's really a harmful statement to make.
Yeah.
And our concern is really the B40, whether they are the ones largely responsible for withdrawing. We shouldn't be concerned because the rich are withdrawing it, because the EPI is meant for post-retirement. If you are a businessman invested in $1 billion business, there's no issue about their livelihood. Now, talking about this, we'll have to then just see whether that the money that's withdrawn is used to buy largely goods made in Malaysia. It's a very important thing. If they are largely going to be buying imported goods.
Or traveling.
Or even travel, of course. And again, traveling in foreign airlines and so on. It would mean a leakage in the system. And the demand that is created from that 7.81 billion is actually diffusing outside the economy. Now, that's a concern that one should have. Now, that actually requires, again, looking at the data. What does the data tell? Now, of course, such an amount can help boost the economy, provided it's confined largely to the domestic, or to boost the domestic economy.
But that data will be very difficult to get, isn't it? How people are spending that additional money that they've taken out.
Since the concern we have, I mean, if we end up feeling that out of the 7.81 billion, a whole lot of it is withdrawn not by the B40, that shouldn't be a real concern for us. Except that the other measures of what the Bank Negara or the government does to discourage, for example, the withdrawals from being directed at the external economy. Now, what that actually means is that this group of B40 we're more concerned about. If they are withdrawing because of emergencies, we'll have to see why these emergencies are taking place. It also requires revamping, restructuring, a whole range of things so that we are sterilizing the system in such a way that the poor will not be so vulnerable to all these emergencies. But otherwise, we now are looking at whether they are actually spending the money using Malaysian firms. Even if the firm is a foreign firm, it's still better than buying an imported good. But still, the remittances that would come from profits appropriated from those transactions So if you're looking at boosting the economy, 7.81 billion, now this is the problem I have had because I remember in a way where we had this knee-jerk reaction when we had the global financial crisis. All of a sudden, there's a huge collapse in exports.
Yeah.
The central bank promoted aggressively by lowering interest rates, borrowings. What that has done is really to exacerbate household debt. I'm not sure. It is still a problem we're grappling with, something that started in 2008, 2009.
Yeah.
So we have to be really careful to see the macroeconomy as a whole. What is happening? Picture it, get all the data correctly, and then see whether this 7.81 billion is indeed going to boost the economy. Remember, we have been talking about, at least our main reader was talking about slow growth in wages.
Yeah,
whether, and we are concerned about, and I'm not sure whether this can be achieved, the median income that Malaysians have had, 2.6 thousand, which is 2,600 a month, median household income, 2023. Government is keen, introducing the NIMP4, to raise it to 4.51 thousand, which is 4,510 ringgit by 2030.
Right.
Is this realizable? Is a question that you need to pose too.
Right. And one final question, Prof, just before I let you go. Will this then affect annual dividends which go out to members every year?
Again, the determination of dividends is done by the EPF board. And now, will that affect? You see, the thing is, more of the money is withdrawn. It means having to pay less dividend. People have basically detached themselves from having to access the dividend we are speaking about.
Yeah.
Now, again, it depends on returns. Remember that EPF, like many other bodies that we have, it's got huge funds, and where they put the money will attract more returns than you and me putting the funds. We'll probably get the most, and with the OPR at 3%, we'll get less than that in the savings market, or even in fixed deposits. So the question of whether it will affect the dividends, it again depends on the returns they are getting from their own investments. So whether it will go up or not will depend on that. Okay. Now, because the 7.81 billion is being withdrawn, it only means that there are less obligations to pay a relatively higher rate because much of it is no longer there.
Prof, thank you so much for your wonderful insights today.
Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all the time we've got for On the Table this evening. We've been speaking to Professor Dr. Raja Rasya of the Asia-Europe Institute at University of Malaya. Together with Otto, I'm Mohana Priya. From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Good night.